Hello and welcome to episode 310 of Hot Media. I'm Bob Mann, and today I'm doing a monologue because the semester is ending where I teach at Caldwell University in New Jersey, and that means that one of my favorite courses is also wrapping up. It's called Television Show Genres. And what I like to do is to use my Hot Media podcast to actually share with my audience some of the things that right now are only being shared with my 13 different students in the course. And I do take particular pride in this course because I put it together years ago so I could talk to students not only about the artistic aspect of television shows, but also the business aspect. TV shows are a business and an art at the same time. That sounds like a contradiction, but you know that very often a great television show doesn't make it because of the fact that it just doesn't have ratings. And very often, horrible TV shows live on for years in syndication and make millions, even though artistically they are garbage. So, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what went on in this course from late August into December. We're actually recording this just a little bit before Thanksgiving. And just the way that we teach it to the students, I'm going to do it the same way. We're going to stick with the title and we're going to do it by genre, which is why this episode is titled Television History Part 1. And yes, if you're going to teach the art and the business of television shows, you certainly need to be looking into TV history. And the first genre we're going to talk about is what we usually do here, talk shows. Now, when television started, it really started in the lab in the 1920s. Most people credit Philo Farnsworth with creating the medium of television, but really it is something which was the compilation of many different inventors over the course of the years and the decades, and finally Philo Farnsworth, not easy to say, Philo T. Farnsworth, that's easier to say, ended up creating what is called electronic television, which is really the basis of what we have today and have had in our homes for the past 70 to 75 years. So most TV show genres are just taken from radio, and there is a logical reason for that. It was the radio companies, CBS, NBC, and ABC, the big networks, that became the first major television companies. So for the most part, they imported their genres like sitcoms, soap operas, quiz shows, dramas, news. They've just transported it from the audio medium over to the audio visual medium of television. And of course, there have been talk shows and radio for many, many years, but the TV talk show has a lot of its own feel. The late night entertainment, some of the politically opinionated news shows, they really generated themselves on television and not really on radio, even though talk is a genre for radio. So let's start it off with the first major genius, an executive genius in this field, and his name was Sylvester Pat Weaver. Pat Weaver was the father of famous actor Sigourney Weaver, and he created both The Today Show in 1952 and The Tonight Show in 1954. The original star of The Tonight Show was a comedian and musician by the name of Steve Allen, very funny guy. And he had to cover 1 hour and 45 minutes every single night, which is unbelievable. The Tonight Show went down to being just an hour and a half and then just an hour as time went on. That's a lot of time to fill. And Steve filled it mainly with comedy and with music, which makes perfect sense. Well, in 1957, Steve Allen was promoted by NBC into primetime. And I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because in primetime, the pressure is on and you can be canceled quickly. But his successor, Jack Paar, truly made it into a talk show. Steve Allen did not want to get involved in any major controversies. It was just the opposite for his successor, Jack Paar. Jack Paar talked with authors, movie stars, Broadway stars, fascinating people, and it was very witty repartee. And when you actually look back at some of the archives of the Jack Paar Tonight Show, he had some of the major politicians of the day, like Bobby Kennedy, on his show. This was something that Johnny Carson really didn't get into years later, and Steve Allen certainly had not done before. Jack Parr had one minor controversy, which certainly shows just how puritanical those times were in the late 50s and early 60s. He was censored. NBC censored his show because he had made a reference to the WC. The WC is a very innocent reference to the bathroom. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous that NBC would have made such a deal about it. And it was so ridiculous that what ended up happening was Jack Parr just walked off the show. And his final words on The Tonight Show, or at least he thought those were his final words, they weren't. He said, "There has to be a better way to make a living than this." Well, he left for weeks, finally came back, and he said to his audience, "Well, when I left, I said, there has to be a better way to make a living than this. Well, I have looked, and there isn't." Jack's timing was better than mine, but it was priceless. And of course, it is a great gig, but it has a lot of pressure. Well, in 1962, Jack Parr, like Steve Allen before him, was promoted to prime time, and now the search was on for another successor. This time, NBC found Johnny Carson. Johnny Carson had hosted a comedy show for CBS. He had hosted a game show for ABC. As a matter of fact, they had to run a lot of guest hosts out there all summer in 1962 because Johnny Carson couldn't get out of his contract doing a game show called Who Do You Trust on ABC. Finally, in October of 1962, he goes on the air, and Johnny Carson ruled the airwaves for 30 years. Think about it. Steve Allen only does the Tonight Show for 3 years. Jack Parr for 5. Johnny Carson does it for 30, and he is the king of late-night television. And it certainly wasn't for lack of trying on the part of the other networks. There were many big names who went up against Johnny Carson and lost. Merv Griffin, Dick Cavett, Joey Bishop, Joan Rivers. And they were not the only ones. No one succeeded. The Johnny Carson Tonight Show was mainly comedy. There was some music, but mainly comedy. And it didn't get extremely political either. As a matter of fact, we talked on my podcast, Hot Media with Bob Mann, a few weeks ago with Bill Carter, who is a television critic and author. He has written many books about this medium. And he pointed out that late night hosts only became political very recently, A, because of Donald Trump, but B, because TV is so narrowcast and you can see all 3 late night shows. You can pick whichever one you want, and there is almost equal strength among Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel. Well, that wasn't the case, so Carson had to be very middle of the road in terms of his comedy, mainly talking about how Gerald Ford was a klutz, or he fell, or he hit somebody with a golf ball. Nothing really serious and scathing the way that Colbert is today. So Johnny Carson was king, and he deserved it. He was a natural on television. He was one of my childhood idols, as a matter of fact. But the only person to finally succeed in knocking him from his throne was a young comedian named Arsenio Hall in the 1990s. And Arsenio wasn't even on a network. This was a syndicated television show, first-run syndication, meant for syndication, but it was on Channel 9, a then independent station here in the New York City market, and it was on around the country, and Arsenio was in touch with younger people and their tastes in music. Arsenio was in touch with younger people and their taste in comedy and movies and who they were interested in hearing. And of course, the most famous moment came in 1992. We already knew Johnny Carson was retiring, but Arsenio topped everyone when he brought in the young governor, Bill Clinton, who was trailing in the polls, onto a show. And Bill Clinton played Heartbreak Hotel on the sax, and then he and Hillary talked politics with Arsenio for quite some time. And that show obviously became so incredibly entrenched, but it faded fast. But Johnny Carson was gone. Jay Leno, of course, hosted The Tonight Show after. There was the controversy with Conan O'Brien. Then Jay Leno was back, and now for many years, since 2014, it's been Jimmy Kimmel. And I mentioned the other kings of late night who have really risen to a point where it is a much more equal battle, Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Fallon, and Jimmy Kimmel. Kimmel, of course, hosting The Tonight Show. And years after the great David Letterman, you have a case in which you have an equally great, in my opinion, successor in Stephen Colbert at the Ed Sullivan Theater. But The Tonight Show and late night is not all there is to television talk as a genre. There's daytime TV, and the first person who turned daytime TV into something controversial and in some cases a little bit risque, but certainly controversial, was Phil Donahue. Phil Donahue in 1967 in Dayton, Ohio, in a very conservative town on a local show, brought on as his guest the woman who headed the American Atheism Organization. He referred to her in a later interview as the most hated person in America. As a result of this, the show got a lot of buzz. It eventually went to Chicago. It eventually went into syndication. But here's the thing. If you're going to shock, if you're going to upend, if you're going to disrupt, if you're doing it in daytime TV, you have to do it 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year. That makes the topics a little bit tough to be really relevant and really important. Donahue hung in there, but he also gave birth to a semi-ridiculous genre called tabloid TV talk. And this really is a situation that has spawned the Jerry Springers and the Maury Poviches. How do you say the plural of Povich? Maury Povich is well, whatever it is, Maury Povich. And, Geraldo and the chair throwing. But there is one person who rose to the top and always did it with class in daytime talk, and that, of course, is Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey could mix a little bit of gossip with a lot of very serious talk, self-revelation, and many people who study the art of talk show performance see Oprah as the greatest of all time. She always remained in syndication and always remained in daytime. And then the other type of talk show is the news talk show. Now, those have been around for a long time, but they were usually buried on Sunday mornings. Meet the Press, for example, which is still around after all these years, started in radio. But then in 1979, most people will remember, whether it's from their own memory or simply because of the fact that it was something which they know about historically or through the movie Argo, the American embassy in Tehran, Iran, was taken over. Held captive were many American diplomats. And this was a real crisis and a humiliation for the United States. ABC, which had no late night programming. Can you believe a major network like ABC had no late night programming? Well, they decided to do a news special every night, America Held Hostage. Its format of more talk than straight up reporting. They do a report, a thorough report at the beginning, but then talk to people all over the world via satellite. Kind of seems like now, actually, the way that we do everything at home and, from remote locations. But Ted Koppel was a brilliant interviewer, and he was able to stimulate excitement every night. And eventually, of course, the show went beyond the hostage crisis in Iran, which was settled in 1981, and the show went on for decades. And the idea of the news talk show was really born and taken away from Sunday morning, where it was pretty much hidden away. The only problem with it is that it led to a lot of our current political climate. Cable television began in 1980. And when it began, not cable television, cable television news, excuse me. Cable television news began in 1980, all news all the time on CNN, which stands for Cable News Network. But that led eventually in 1996 to Fox News with a very different political spin and to talk shows at night. While the news during the day may be similar on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, when it gets to the nighttime, to the talk shows, which are not always labeled as talk and opinion, by the way, it changes to extremely political and extremely partisan. My favorite of all is Anderson Cooper, but for many people, the favorite could be Tucker Carlson. I disagree vehemently with Tucker Carlson, but I can't argue with the success of people like Carlson and Sean Hannity. And on the left, you have the very strong views of Rachel Maddow. So talk shows are one of the most enduring genres of all television history. But what's really funny about it is if you've ever taken a course in television production, one of the things that you're told right away is that the biggest sin in television production, it is what is called talking head because of the fact that it's considered visually boring, but yet talk shows are such a staple, they make such a profit. Well, how do you make something that's visually boring into a winner on television, which talk shows certainly have been? You have to have compelling content, but you have to have a compelling host. You have to have somebody who people are tuning in to watch, not just the guests, not just the topics, not just the content, but who really want to see that host. That could be Oprah Winfrey, Johnny Carson, Arsenio Hall, Stephen Colbert. Over the years, the people come and they eventually go, but the genre does live on. Well, we're heading into Thanksgiving, and of course, normally this is a talk show in which I'm doing interviews, but I do wish you happy holidays. And in our next episode, 311, I'm going to be talking more about the history of television. And it really kind of fills a gap for me because I do miss this course when it does come to an end, TV show genres. Let me talk about this podcast, which is primarily an audio podcast, but we also are on YouTube. And I would ask you to go to YouTube. The only thing is, while I have my own channel, I don't have my own unique URL. So the situation is you got to search for Bob Manhunt Media. And then if you go on there, please subscribe. If you're watching on there right now, please subscribe because we need subscribers. And please search for Bob Man Hot Media because you do not want to confuse me with Bob Man, the golf guy, who is all over YouTube. You can go to follow me on Twitter, my handle at Bob Man Media. But the website really is the place that is going to give you the most information about the show. And that is www.bobmanhotmedia.com. And I certainly hope that you follow me. I hope you subscribe, whether it's on Spotify or Apple Podcast, Odyssey, or any of the audio platforms. And also watch and subscribe on YouTube. When I talk to you next, there are many other genres that I want to talk about. I did one in class the other day at Caldwell University, children's television. It is amazing what that evokes from the students. People of any age, unless, it's like the greatest generation, like my parents' generation that grew up on radio. If you grew up a baby boomer or beyond, you really have that very special place in your heart for what were your favorite kid shows. So please be watching for that. And when we get back to having guests, obviously, we are going to be hoping that you are with us on a regular basis right here on Hot Media, the podcast that talks about the hottest issues and the hottest controversies and the hottest content in mass media.